It doesn't matter what kind of geopolitical games are going on between Russia and EU or Russia and NATO. One doesn't draw it out on battle lines, sacrificing innocent women and children in order to avoid World War III. We are already at war, and this is an attack against world freedom.
For decades, the EU and NATO have been in competition with Russia over control of Ukraine, and it appears this war will break Ukraine up into a Western and an Eastern Ukraine. Putin's strategy in this horrific war points towards an end game. His goal was always to expand into the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, where political support from ethnic Russians who have long been divided from Western Ukraine, both politically and economically, runs high. Russian President Vladimir Putin has sacrificed newly recruited Russian conscripts and Chechen soldiers to engage in conflicts in northern and western Ukraine districts as a way to distract Ukraine whilst positioning his more advanced army to occupy the surrounding cities in eastern Ukraine around Luhansk and Donetsk. It's a very sad game of chess where Putin not only kills innocent Ukraine civilians but also sacrifices his own countrymen, young 20-year-olds who we have seen had no idea of what they were doing in Ukraine, getting captured and killed to the shock of their families back home. But what really angers me and the rest of the world is that Putin has dared to subject innocent women and children to this horror just to advance his decades-old geopolitical competition against NATO and the EU.
History will remind us that whilst we in Europe feared the implications to the oil prices and energy bills and failed to fully cut off our Russian energy imports, innocent civilians were being bombed in Kiev and Kharkiv. History will also remind us that while 44 million Ukrainians were exposed to genocide, we in Europe were too scared to demand our governments to stand up to this tyranny because we were told sending a peacekeeping force into Ukraine would potentially start a third world war. We accepted such unimaginable, indiscriminate evils on our doorstep because of the perceived threats made by one man. Russian President Vladimir Putin, in effect, silenced Western military might. Crimes we wouldn't accept in distant lands were directly accepted on our borders.
Faced with the reality that NATO wasn't able to directly engage Russia in their hour of need, Ukraine will most likely surrender parts of its sovereign decision to join NATO to Putin. Which begs the question, why did Western European leaders spend months arguing with Russia about this perceived red line? Over and over again, we heard Ukraine's sovereign rights to join NATO is off limits. If we were not willing to defend her rights to join NATO, as it now appears, why were we insisting it was Ukraine's decision to make? For decades, the Russians made it clear that Ukraine in NATO was a red line they were not willing to accept. Now that Putin has employed such evil devastations around Ukraine, he would most likely seek to stretch his advantage by making even a few more demands from Ukraine before pulling his troops out of Kiev and northern Ukraine. The only situation that may extend this war is if Putin refuses to allow Western Ukraine to join the EU. As we know, dictators are greedy. The only way for a long-term peace is if Western Ukraine is allowed closer ties with Europe, while Eastern Ukraine continues to operate closer ties with Russia.
This is a border war. If Putin is allowed to invade Ukraine and President Zelensky has requested help, then why can't nations on a peacekeeping humanitarian mission invade Ukraine to defend her? Why can't NATO forces put on Ukrainian insignia as President Putin's forces did in Crimea 8 years ago? Why hasn't NATO installed a ground-based air defense system in the northwest of Ukraine, just like Britain has done in Poland? Do we have any red lines? Or is President Putin allowed to slaughter all 44 million Ukrainians if he chooses to? Because we are afraid of World War III? Before America joined World War II, America granted their skilled Air Force fighter pilots leave of absence to join the RAF in an international fighter command force that took on Hitler's Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain in the skies. Why haven't we offered fighter pilots leave of absence so they can support President Zelensky's international resistance force. We could send modern air fighter planes painted in Ukrainian colors as part of military aid. Fighter pilots can put on Ukrainian military insignia. We don't fight because of NATO borders. We defend because of humanity. Little children being bombed do not understand the geopolitical realities of NATO.
Last night, as I nodded off, safely tucked in the comfort of my own bed next to my sleeping wife, I was abruptly woken by a vision, a nightmare. I saw desperate women and children, but it was the howling sound that jolted me to my feet. Hopeless screams in anticipation of sudden death. I can still hear them when I close my eyes and think about it. I am here, speaking to you because of this nightmare in Ukraine. And so I ask, sanctions? Good in the long term. Dictators would think twice about bombing civilians in the future. But how can we abandon their pleas and cries for help? It breaks my heart, the fear and the trauma. Putin promised the mobilization was a military operation. Why did we trust him? If we didn't, then why didn't we expect him to break his word as he always does? Why didn't we send in a military deterrent months before the attack, while his troops were still on the border? World War II didn't start when Britain and France declared war on Hitler for invading Poland. World War II started when Hitler declared war on Poland. We are already in World War III. Putin invaded Ukraine, even dared to state that Ukraine is not a real nation. The UK, along with US and France, promised to protect Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum of Security Assurances in 1994. Ukraine gave up her nuclear weapons because of these assurances that we made to protect her territorial integrity. We placed no prerequisites then on Ukraine's defense, and we shouldn't place those barriers now in defending Ukraine on the ground.
Sir Winston Churchill taught us that you cannot negotiate with Hitler. Sanctions cannot stop the global price of oil from increasing. Russia can sell oil at a high cost to China to make up for Russia's losses. Why are we worried about Russian gas when Ukrainians are worried about their lives? When we block 80% of Russia from SWIFT, Putin uses the other 20% to finance his war. Ukraine gave up her nuclear weapons for world peace. We must be prepared to stand for her, for world peace. The world is not a safe place if we fail to stand up to this murderous campaign on innocent civilians who have nothing to do with this geopolitical situation.
In closing, I do need to say to those who have ears to hear, I've been alarmed by the coordinated response of Western refusal to send in any troops to defend Ukraine. Western leaders seem to succumb to this pre-scripted political manifesto that allegedly states sending peace-seeking troops to the Ukraine border will start World War III. What if he decides to murder 44 million Ukrainians? Do we still insist we do not want to start World War III? Alliances are powerful, but when they become united in succumbing to evil, we are on the verge of a dangerous precedence. I am all for globalism when it comes to trade, but when nations cease to have an individual voice, when it seems that superpowers are politically run by one voice, one government, this can be concerning. As we all pray for peace, remember, the only reason why evil prevails is because good men do nothing. NATO is 10 times more powerful than Russia.